You're listening to a Mamamia podcast.
Mamamia acknowledges the traditional owners of land and waters that this podcast is recorded on.
Mamamia Out Loud!
Hello and welcome to Mamamia Out Loud and to our Friday show where we take a breath from the news cycle and breathe out. Today is Friday the 9th of August and I'm Holly Wainwright. Hi.
I'm Leah Freedman. Hello.
I'm Jessie Stevens. I'm trying to think of a different way to
G'day.
say hi.
G'day.
Ahoy.
On the show today, the burden of caring for babies, for sick friends and parents. Is it time to recast care work as a privilege? And we recommend 2 things to watch and 1 thing to listen to all weekend. And our best and worsts, including a special exemption from talking about news, some wholesome family content from the Freedman house, and a night out at the greatest show in the world. But first, Mia Freedman.
In case you missed it, there's a new kind of relationship that is causing issues in the dating world, and it has to do with the colour of your text message when you send a text. Young people are expressing on the internet their hatred of what they are dubbing mixed phone relationships. Jessie, I believe you're in a mixed phone relationship.
I am, but it's never really caused any issues, so I'm very interested.
I think you're wrong about that. I am too. Now, if you're wondering what a mixed phone relationship is, it means if you are partnered with someone or dating someone who uses Android and you are on the Apple system, because texting is a problem, particularly group texts.
You know,
So if there's someone in your family, for example, and I have 2 members of my family who are in Android, and that's why we all had to switch to WhatsApp for group messages.
Or we do Facebook Messenger.
No,
Yeah, that's
we
what
don't.
we do in our family.
No.
Yeah.
Not everybody in my family is on Facebook
explains-
because I have people who are under the age of 100.
This explains a great deal to me, not about my relationship, but about, you know, like when you've got a kids' sporting group or whatever, and you need to all talk to the parents.
Yep.
And I'll always say, like, can we have a group text or a WhatsApp? And lots of people will be like, I don't WhatsApp, I Facebook message. And I'm like, why do I have to have 25 things? It's you Android people's
I
fault.
think WhatsApp is, don't look at Jessie, she's on Apple, but I think the default
She's
tends
Android
to be
adjacent.
WhatsApp is neutral. WhatsApp is the neutral messaging service that everybody can be on, except for the people who have ethical issues with Meta, and I can't help you.
So what's the problem? If a message comes in as green or blue, how does that affect me in my life? So my mum's messages come in green because she is an Android user and then she asks for help and I say, I don't know what language this phone is in.
So for Apple users messaging other Apple users, the text bubble is blue. But if an Apple user is messaging an Android user, say someone who has a Samsung phone, the text bubble is not blue, it's green. And that is a red flag for some people. And this is a real sticking point for Gen Z. So we asked our co-host, Em Vernon, if she had encountered this mixed phone relationship situation. And of course she has. Here she is.
So I dated a guy who had an Android. And the reason I knew he had an Android was because when we immediately started texting, we first matched on a dating app and then we moved over to text and his bubbles came up in green. And I think it's like a rite of passage. Like the first question I asked him was, do you have an Android? Because I'm like, I want to understand the meaning behind the green bubble. Maybe he doesn't like iMessage. Maybe he's saving some money. And he's like, yeah, is that a red flag? And I was like, oh, no, I was just wondering. And he's like, okay, good. Because every time I say I have an Android to a girl, she ends up ghosting me.
That seems harsh.
It's a specific personality type, I'll say that. And I say that with my mum and my husband.
Yeah.
There is a stubbornness that comes from being an Android person. There is a
Smugness
that's like, you got the default, you got the mainstream, you basic bitch. What I did was did my research. And so I have this phone that no one else in the world uses, which is very your husband.
Yeah, the thing that makes Jason happier than anything in the world is when we have problems with our Apple devices. He loves it.
Android
he loves
users
it.
thrive.
Being in a mixed phone relationship has its challenges, including not being able to airdrop. Very annoying. No FaceTime. Can't FaceTime. Annoying. And sharing chargers is a disaster.
Yeah, you say that, but the latest iPhone, Android charger. We've moved to the USB-C, and I think we can all agree as a culture,
true.
full stop.
It's better for us all.
Yep, that's just what we're on now. We're not inventing
But
another
only
charger.
if you have the latest Apple.
Yes.
Outlouders, I bet there are lots of you who are in mixed phone relationships. What are the telltale signs of an Android user? That's what I want to know.
If you had a friend who said to you, I'm taking time off work to care for my terminally ill mother, or I'm the full-time carer to my adult child with additional needs, or even I'm at home with 3 kids this weekend, how would you respond?
I'm so sorry.
Yeah, you might say, that must be hard.
Yeah.
I don't know how you do it. In the case of a parent with an illness, you would absolutely
I would say
"I'm
that's
sorry."
tough. That's
Yeah,
really tough.
That's really tough. What can I do?
Yeah.
And all those things would be a true and a compassionate response. We might think about the burden of care, the emotional and financial cost, maybe even feel some pity about people in that situation.
Or empathy. Yeah.
Well, a woman named Alyssa Strauss wants to challenge that a little bit. She's written a book called When You Care, The Unexpected Magic of Caring for Others, and she was interviewed for Anne Helen Peterson's newsletter this week. She argues that basically as a culture, we have no curiosity when it comes to caring. We're doing a great job at casting caring in the worst possible light. There's no infrastructure or support for caregivers, so care makes you poor and it exhausts you. She talks about compulsory or coerced care, which is something that patriarchy has done a great job of sustaining for a very long time. Feminism has had to rebel against this in some ways. But this view of caring as uninteresting or unproductive is very Western, and it overlooks that care is actually what makes the world go round. Strauss writes, nobody turns to the mum or caregiver at a dinner party and asks for her broader insights into life or human psychology or philosophy, even though they might have a lot more insights than the guy in the suit with a fancy degree or whatever.
Yeah.
Instead,
Or the lady in the suit
yeah,
who pushes buttons all day.
the lives of carers are assumed to be a bit of a tragedy. But the people she interviewed found a lot of purpose and meaning in what they did. And these people doing the work of maintaining, preserving and cultivating humanity are abundantly worthy of collective support. I think we can agree. In the interview, Anne Helen Peterson says, and this is specifically about parenting, I just keep thinking of how many parents I know of all genders who are utterly unprepared for parenting, in part because they'd never done this sort of work, never woven it into their daily lives, never diapered a baby, sure, but also never figured out how to get through a boring day. We know that care work is underpaid and undervalued and under-resourced, all which needs to be addressed. But is it time to talk about the meaning, the self-worth and the connection that can also come from care?
Wow, this is amazing. I think that at the heart of this is that caring in our society has always been a female task and a female responsibility. And I won't say privilege because women have rarely, as you said, had a choice. And I think that any role or task in our society that is predominantly done by women has low status, always has. So I think that when someone has to care for someone else, it is seen as a compromise and a sacrifice. The idea of it being a privilege, I've experienced this caring for someone while they were dying. I wasn't the sole carer, but I was in the inner circle, and that was an incredible privilege. But it didn't go on for a really, really long time. The types of caring where someone is sick or caring for children, it is just long and monotonous. And I think what you say is really interesting. It makes me think about our conversations about babysitting. So, you know, my son doesn't want to babysit, loves Luna to pieces, but doesn't want to change a nappy. Now, I think that's pretty typical of a 15-year-old boy.
Yeah.
But also, if you're in a big family, you just have to. Like, you just have to do that stuff. And it is the stuff of life, doing things you don't want to do. I'm so about our society not preparing us for things we don't want to do because we get instant gratification. You know, if you're bored, pick up your phone. If you're thirsty, reach 1 centimetre for your water bottle. We don't have to sacrifice anything. We don't have to experience uncomfortable emotions. And I love what you say about it can be really boring.
And we're obsessed with productivity, right?
Yeah.
And we've seen that as almost an impediment to productivity, where it's like, oh, if I'm at home with the kids all day, I can't get this done. As though being with the kids at home all day
isn't
also a thing. And there's a gendered element, but there's another element.
That's capitalism, right?
Capitalism, which is also about the cult of individualism, that we like to think and believe that we are individuals who have agency and who have control and power and can draw boundaries around ourselves. But that's a fallacy. Like, we are deeply interconnected, and whether it's as babies or whether it's as elderly people,
We rely on each other.
We rely on each other, and we're probably going to need nappies changed on either side. But that's something we don't want to think about until we're in it, I think. Holly, do you think that this is a little bit dangerous? Is it a way of kind of romanticizing something that's
and saying
hard?
It's a privilege,
It's
like,
a privilege,
like being
yeah.
a DCC cheerleader. You don't need to be paid. It's just, I'm just caring for the honour of
It's
it.
just, yeah.
The
I think
privilege.
there's a lot of nuance in it, right? Because I entirely agree that caring is a privilege, and I also entirely agree that it's going to teach you more about life than many things. I loved that quote in the interview about, not turning to the woman at the dinner table because you're like, well, what do you know? Stay home with babies all day. I entirely understand that. But I worry a little bit about us reframing, well, what an enormous privilege it is to care for somebody in a thankless way, because it is always women. It is always women, right? And I
Teachers,
think,
nurses.
yes, but they're paid.
But not well.
Yes, but the unpaid roles, the tension in this is it's expected you'll do it. And some people, male or female, will be good at it and some people won't. I hate the idea that we think all women are nurturers and carers and somehow instinctively going to be better at this, because I don't actually, I could say about myself with a lot of honesty that I do not think I'm a very nurturing person, and I'm not very good at looking after people when they're sick. And I know that if and when that comes to me in whatever form, it will be really hard for me to do that. Whereas I know other people who are such instinctive caregivers, they take care of everyone around them all the time, and they almost force care upon you because they're like, I need to look after you. It's part of their fabric.
Do you think that's because some people find self-worth and meaning in care and status in care and others don't?
I don't think it's all about that. I don't think that I'm not very good at it because it doesn't have status for me. I think I'm just not that kind of person. And I also think that my mother isn't that kind of person. It's I just don't agree that women are always good at it. So, the default thing that we have discussed on this show of the oldest daughter syndrome, that very often the person who will be the one who's making the decisions for families about elder care and, health decisions will end up being the eldest daughter. Often that's whether she's the best suited for that or not. And she very well might not be.
And it might not even be the oldest daughter. It might be the youngest
daughter-in-law.
child. You're saying it's the oldest daughter. So even if there's 5 children but the youngest one is a daughter, it'll be the daughter because she's the oldest
and
daughter.
that's why I liked the terminology of coerced.
Yes. Can you explain that a little bit more?
So the history of it is that it was difficult to find privilege in something that you were forced to do. I'm talking in past tense as though this is a relic of history, but it's not. It's still something that happens. If you have a terminally ill parent or spouse, then you do have to do that. Maybe if you've got a really close relationship, then you can find privilege in it. But other people have almost been forced to care for children they didn't want to have, for example. And that's a totally different thing.
Tradwives. So Tia Levings, who I interviewed on No Filter this week, she talks about, you think of the Duggars and 19 Kids and Counting in those communities, often religious communities where contraception is not available to them or it is against their religion, and they are essentially encouraged / coerced / forced to keep having children. So they're forced to stay in this caregiving role. Yeah. And
which
some
is
of them,
all-consuming.
Yeah, and not everybody wants to do that. Not everybody does feel like it's a blessing, and many of them become very resentful, and also they're trapped.
I want to talk about the issue of, do we need to change our language and the attitudes we have towards people who are in caring roles or taking on caring responsibilities? Absolutely we do. We need to give it much more respect and importance and support, especially because it affects so many women. But one of the reasons why it's seen as a very difficult thing to do is because very often the women, if we're calling women who are doing it, they have a lot of other responsibilities too, right? When you are in a position where you are, yes, caring for an elderly parent or a child who is not as independent as they could be, whether that's because of an illness or because of a circumstance or because of a mental illness or for whatever reason, you're very often also having to work, if you possibly can, look after other people in your life, do all these other things. So it's like unpaid labor. And I know that it's not right to call it labor when it is a privilege, but it's That's not a
Is it a
joyful
privilege
existence.
to wipe a baby's bum every day or wipe an old person's bum every day? Or, you think about the kids who are forced into caring roles with their own parents due to their parents' mental illness or physical illness. And it's the kid who sometimes at a really young age has to do that.
Well, I think meaning and insight, and not to romanticize it too much, but meaning and insight doesn't occur in a 3-second wipe of a bum, right? Like that is one part of one day that most parents, I think, are just like, this is part of the caring. And there was this podcast I was listening to recently by a neuroscientist. He's called like a compassion researcher or something, and he's done all this study, and he just says we don't talk about caring and compassion enough for what it does for the brain. But there's something called like a helper's high. When someone needs something, like let's say a baby is crying, and you give them what they need and they stop crying, there is something that happens to your brain, like a dopamine serotonin release. That's something that's happened to us biologically so that we care for the species. But if you never do it, because you never have to do it, because you've never been a teen babysitter, or you've never cared for another sibling, or you've never looked after your mum when she was sick, or you've never had any contact with a grandmother who was very ill, then it looks really bad from the outside, right? Like you can't see.
It's like what Vernon was talking about last week when she was talking about she looks at people who've just had a baby and she's like, your life looks awful.
Oh, it looks terrible.
But Jessie, what about the people who are caring for people? They don't get that. They don't get the validation. You know, it might be a child who is on the autism spectrum and is nonverbal and is distressed, or caring for someone with Alzheimer's who is violent or has dementia, and there is no dopamine hit from I gave them what they wanted and I did a good thing. There's no sort of validation or reward.
And this is what I found a really clever point in this, where she said that in reshaping a caring society, carers need care, and at the moment carers have no care.
Yeah, that validation should come, in that case, from the society around them. Right?
So in what form?
If I'm a carer, so for example, I have an auntie at the moment, it's laughable the amount of care work she's doing on top of a full-time job, but she's caring for my grandfather with dementia and 2 of my relatives with intellectual disabilities. Now, that is really, really hard. Someone should be cooking her dinner. You know what I mean? Like you look at that and you go, and this is stuff that our families talked about. Caring for the carer and going, okay, you need to not go and see your dad today. We're actually going to get your sibling, or which, we're trying more and more to do. But
it can be very hard for carers to accept care.
Yeah.
And when I spoke to Catherine May on Mid, who's an author who writes a lot about burnout and input in and input out and all that stuff, she said a lot about how caring is a privilege, but also receiving care is a privilege. One of the brilliant examples she had about this, and it goes back to the idea of why you don't ask the woman who's doing the care work for insights, is she said for all the sort of mindfulness programs people sign up for, and, they're searching for meaning in life and they're spending all this money to travel to far-flung places and do meditation workshops, all of which is very worthy if that's what you're doing. She said in some ways there is no more mindful and grounding and thoughtful exercise than getting up to a baby through the night over and over again, or a sick person, and choosing kindness and not anger and trying to be calm and doing it over and over again. And that's the thing, as Mia said before about the repetition of caring work, is that choosing kindness over and over again when you go and unlock your elderly mother's front door and you don't know what you're going to find there and you don't know what kind of mental state they're going to be in and what you might have to do to calm them down over and over and over again, you are learning so much.
Oh.
And that sounds patronizing, as if go you, you don't need any rewarding but it's just so true that we don't value it. It's so true when it's actually very deep.
You know how you said you don't think you're a very nurturing person?
Mm.
And I actually think I'm the same, to my great shame, or I'm conditionally nurturing. Do you think it's because we're more selfish than people like Jessie's aunt?
Yes.
Yeah.
No, I don't think that's it. Firstly,
do.
I think that you're both very caring, but the people in my life who struggle with nurturing, nurturing takes an enormous amount of patience.
Yes.
And I think that some people, there's an impatience that's
have that.
this keeps going. Like, when does
Yeah,
this...
it's like I will do anything for anyone that I love, of course. And, when crisis brings something to your door, you will handle it. And, of course, you will. So I don't mean that I'm not nurturing, as in I'd be like, meh,
The caring you're talking about here is over a long period of time. It's endurance caring, essentially.
Yes. And when I say I don't think I'm instinctively nurturing, is that I have people in my life who are exceptionally good at caring. I just know that I'm not. I think it probably is because I'm quite selfish. And I don't know where I get that from.
I wonder if it's also
it's true.
a bit of a muscle, right? And this is what they were trying to say, is that it's like it can take a while to get into that groove. And like any skill, I suppose, in a way. I was thinking about growing up, I lived with my grandmother who had a stroke and she was blind, and I lived with her for a lot of years. And some of my first memories are, and this is not recommended, alcohol companies will get to me, but I would get like her scotch and soda and give it to her at 5 o'clock just little jobs like that, and like get her dessert for her and come and sit and read to her or whatever.
Patience,
I think
caring.
that is an incredible lesson, because I think that one of the things we struggle with, particularly in this generation where helicopter parenting is the default, is children and young people thinking that they're the centre of the world and not ever putting anyone else's needs above their own. Because I don't think children instinctively want to do that. Like, you wouldn't go, do you want to go and play outside, or do you want to sit with grandma?
And I never saw it as caring. I always saw it as my relationship, which I got an enormous amount back. We would sit there, we would watch Dr. Phil, we'd play Sale of the Century, she'd ask trivia and we'd play.
So there was stuff in it
I
for
thought
you.
I was playing with my nan. But I look back on it now and I'm
was
like,
caring.
There was an element of caring, and I wonder if...
And also giving respite to your mum or your auntie or whoever was...
And I knew I was doing a good thing. When you do something for your nan, like she struggled to put her bra on, she couldn't put it, so I'd help nan put her bra on, or I'd help her in the shower or whatever. You walk away feeling pretty chuffed. In saying that, I was a child and it wasn't my full-time job. But there were moments where I think now, to looking after Luna, and I've found it very difficult to explain what the satisfaction feels like amongst the mundane. And that's what it is. It's one of the best things for my self-worth.
Yes.
Have been moments of caring for
I was
others.
just reading this week, funnily enough, about one of the most powerful ways to deepen your relationship with someone is to ask them to do you a favour.
Yeah.
Which is counterintuitive, right? Because you would have think that to offer someone a favour is how you have connection with them. But there's something about the intimacy of someone asking you to do a favour. I know I feel that way. If someone asks me to do a favour,
You feel
I feel
close.
so close to them, and I do feel like privileged.
Yeah.
Agreed.
And it's your brain going, if I'm doing you a favour, I must really like you.
Yeah, and I get a lot of status from feeling like I'm helping, but that tends to be a fairly short-term thing.
Can I throw a curly conundrum at you? So on the episode of Mid we launched this week, I was talking to this woman called Leslie Morgan. There's episodes about sex and it's great, but that's not what this is about. She's 59 and she is adamant that she doesn't want to repartner after her divorce, and she's had lots of relationships. And she said that what everybody asks her is, isn't she afraid of dying alone? And I want to play you this and see what you think.
People always say to me, aren't you afraid, you're going to die alone? And what I have to say is, you know what? We are all going to die alone. We are all going to die alone. Everybody knows this. And have you met a man who is capable of taking care of a woman, a dying woman, an aged woman? Older men, they don't put in their hearing aids. They're terrible at advocating for anybody. They don't like hospitals. They don't like best. There's no way on earth a man is going to take care of us. I'm sorry to tell everybody listening to it, but I'm actually happy to tell you this because it's true. You're going to take care of you. And the people who are going to be there for you are your best friends, male and female, the healthcare system, and your children if you have them. That's who's going to take care of you. It's not going to be a man. There's no happily ever after. And men think that women are going to take care of them, and they're right because we've been conditioned our whole life to do it. I'm not going to do it, and I would urge you to think about not doing it because there are a lot better things to do with your life than take care of a man who would never take care of you anyway.
So that has pissed a few people off, this statement. I want to know what you think.
I would argue that I would like to do a study that looked at men who spent a lot of time with infant children and men who care for elderly or sick or their spouse. I would like to look at that Venn diagram. I think that if you are 80 years old and you're a man and your wife becomes sick, I actually don't think you have any skill set. You don't have any blueprint for what it looks like to care for someone. And this is an enormous generalisation.
Oh, my grandfather cared for my grandmother. My friend's father cared for her mother. I've seen it play out. Definitely I've seen it play out.
I understand where the idea is coming from. Also, women often live longer than men. So there's a lot of women. My
happens less often.
Exactly. My nan used to say her husband was a war veteran who lost a leg and was quite disabled. And she used to sit there at, 80 and go, I'm shitty. He's not here. He never got to give it back. Like, he died before he could give the care back.
That. Yeah.
I know a lot of older women who feel like that. But there was another great line in this that said, ill, disabled, children, whatever it is, whatever context they are not welcome in, neither are caregivers. And I thought, that is so true. That's what we've been trying to say about, public spaces being welcome to children. But, I've seen it with disability, with comments, with maybe it's someone being noisy and maybe it's someone in a cafe with their carer who's, asking 100 questions and sitting a bit too close to you or whatever. That's what the world looks like. Like, it's messy and it's chaotic.
Yeah, I agree 100%. To Leslie's thing, I think, Mia, yes, we can all provide exceptions to that rule, including in my family that my mother-in-law lived out all her last years with one of her sons. He absolutely views that as a privilege and says it was a joy of his life to do it. But the idea that when Leslie Morgan says so stridently, a man isn't going to look after you, obviously that's a provocative statement. But what she means is they haven't been conditioned to do that, to your point, Jessie, whereas women have, and just be like, well, this is my lot now. This is what my life looks like for as long as whereas men are possibly more likely to go, this isn't what I signed up for. And I think it's really interesting, your point, Jessie, because as we blur the lines of what manhood looks like and womanhood looks like and who's allowed to care and who stays home and who doesn't, maybe those who are best suited to caring, it won't be so gender divided.
Mamamia out loud.
It's Friday, so we wanted to help set up your weekend with our best recommendations as always. Mia Freedman, actually, I think you are listening to what I'm listening to. Tell us.
Chapel Roan.
What
I don't know
is that?
how I started listening to her music. I know what it was. I was reading about how some people were angry that Taylor Swift keeps releasing slightly different versions of her album to game the charts and stay on top when there were a couple of new releases, Charlie XCX with Brat and Chapel Roan with The Rise and Fall of a Midwest Princess, two not new artists but artists in that same sort of demographic who released albums. And it's like Taylor was jockeying to keep them off the top of the charts, which some people said was petty. So I was like, oh, who's Chapel Roan? I've been in such a deep Taylor groove. I need to broaden my horizons. And so I started listening to Chapel Roan and I was a bit like, yeah, interesting. She uploaded a song when she was 17 called Die Young to YouTube, and then she was signed by Atlantic Records in 2017. She released her first album. She cut through in 2020 with a single called Pink Pony Club, and her record label dropped her that year. And then she released a few independent things and reinvented herself. Her actual name is Kaylee Rose Amstutz, but her stage name is Chapel Roan and her aesthetic is drag queen. Like she's not a drag queen, but she's like Gaga.
She's
exactly.
like old world Gaga.
Do I know any
Meets
of
Charli
her songs?
XCX.
There is one song of hers at the minute that is everywhere you go.
There's a single on the album called Good Luck Babe, which you've probably heard. My favourite song is actually not on this new album. It's called Phenomenon, which I'm obsessed with. She released that a couple of years ago. But she's that type of aesthetic with Charli XCX and her where it's like scary sexy. So it's very much not appealing to the male gaze. Like her aesthetic is drag queen. I'm sure she's a queer woman. She talks about having sex with women and she's incredibly cool and just she's a bit Kate Bush in her voice.
She's amazing. The reason I know about her is literally because there was this thing that she's your favourite artist's favourite artist. And that went viral. And then I was like, who is she? And then I listened to and she's amazing.
She is amazing.
And now I can't not play Good Luck Babe around the house all the time. Matilda thinks I'm so embarrassing.
Yeah.
I'm like, do you know who Chapel Roan is, Matilda? And she's just like, oh, I die.
I know, it's awful when your mum's listening to the same music as you. Anyway, her album is The Rise and Fall of a Midwest Princess. Get it into your ears if you want to be groovy.
You've got a TV show, Jessie.
I do. I have the number one reco of the year for me. This is the best thing
Big
I
call.
have consumed.
It's only August.
Well,
I don't trust her because she didn't like Fargo.
I trust her more than you.
I do too.
No.
There's a new show on Apple TV called Presumed Innocent, and it has Jake Gyllenhaal.
Can somebody call my phone?
I'll call it.
Who is this?
This is Jaden.
You tell your mom she looks beautiful. Okay, bye, you guys. Bye.
I just want to make sure that we have everything exactly right.
Let's get started.
Are you aware that Carolyn Williams was murdered? When was the last time you were in Carolyn's apartment?
We had cases together. Sometimes we would work after hours at her apartment.
Your fingerprints were found in her bedroom. Were you and Carolyn romantically involved?
My suspect. Because I did not kill her.
Jake Gyllenhaal's a brilliant actor.
He's still got Taylor's scarf.
He does, and I keep
poor
thinking
man.
about that, and I think all is forgiven. When you watch his performance in this, we forgive him for what he did to Taylor. It is so suspenseful, so interesting.
Will I hate it?
Nah, you'll love it.
Is it
Crime,
very
isn't it?
violent?
It's crime, but it's not like you don't actually see. It starts off where prosecutor, that's Jake Gyllenhaal, he's this prosecutor, and he finds out that his colleague and fellow prosecutor has been murdered in a way that resembles a case they used to work on. And so you see there's a bit of, it's gory.
Is she a woman?
She's a woman who is the main character in The Worst Person in the World, which is one of my favourite movies of all time. Anyway, so he finds this out and he's kind of the chief prosecutor, and then it unfolds why he can't work on this case. And it has some of the best twists. And I am about 6 episodes in.
How many episodes?
I think there's 7 or 8.
How long are they?
They actually vary. It's almost like watching these mini movies. Luca and I got into bed last night and we went, we're going to keep watching it.
Are you binging it?
Binging it. He goes to bed at 9. It was 10:45 and we could not turn it off. Like, I have no idea.
So gotta
you
get
know
into
when you're at the pointy end and you go, it could be anyone. I can guess every television show. This one has got me. Like, it's heaps of famous faces, brilliant scripting, lots of courtroom. I love being in a courtroom. Jake Gyllenhaal at his best. It is called Presumed Innocent. It's so
I'm
good.
going to watch that.
I've seen it everywhere. It must be good. I've got a TV show too. It's also crime. So this is a true crime binge for you this weekend. It's also based on a true story, but it's also very relevant to some of the things we've been talking about lately. It's called Under the Banner of Heaven. It's on SBS On Demand, so it's free, friends. And it stars Andrew Garfield, Daisy Edgar-Jones and Sam Worthington.
This stays between us. This case I'm working on is a double murder. So far, what we've found isn't pointing outward. The evidence points to things and to beliefs that I have only ever heard whisperings about.
And it's set in Utah in 1984, and it's based on the true story of a murder that happened within the Mormon community in Utah then. And Daisy Edgar-Jones is the victim of said murder.
How do we know her again?
She
Crawdads
was
and
in
Normal People.
Normal People, Crawdads,
Oh, with
Twisters.
Paul
She's a big
Mescal and
name.
the Chain.
Yeah. She's a big star these days. The thing that's really interesting about it is it's set in this tradwifey Mormon world, right? And it delves into all of that world, but from lots of different angles, because the baddies, in inverted commas, are in that world, but also the cop, who's Andrew Garfield, is also in that world. So he's LDS, as they call it, Church of the Latter-day Saints, but so are the victims. And it's like this amazing insight into what that world is like. And it is
that's
it's
next
also
for me.
a whodunit. It's kind of thinky because it kind of goes back in time also to like the foundations of that religion. But it's so good. It's so well done. It's so interesting. And it's basically about what happens when women within that religion start challenging the religion. And Andrew Garfield's character, the cop, he has a very traditional marriage too, but he's not quite so controlling as some of the really traditional guys. And it talks about polygamy, and it's just great. Anyway, it's called Under the Banner of Heaven. It's on SBS On Demand, and you can watch it whenever you want. For links to all of our recommendations that we talk about on the show, make sure you sign up to the Mamamia Out Loud newsletter.
Gosh, it's good.
Our friend Em Vernon writes it, and it's got every recommendation that you would like.
It's a lot of also behind-the-scenes footage of us, videos, secrets.
We tell secrets.
We'll put a link in the show notes.
Every Tuesday and Thursday, we drop new segments of Mamamia Out Loud just for Mamamia subscribers. Follow the link in the show notes to get your daily dose of Out Loud, and a big thank you to all our current subscribers.
It is time for Best and Worst, the part of the show where we share a little more from our personal lives. I'm going to go first. My worst, this is just so basic, but I'm not getting any fresh air.
Why not? Oh, no.
Because I exercise indoors, which I always like. I like it. It's safe. It's the same every day. I don't have to think. I don't have to make decisions. The weather, it's all fine. And then I get in my car and I drive to work, and then I work in a building with no open windows, and then I get back in my car and I go home.
You should get the bus.
I couldn't bear that.
I
I go
know.
nuts if I don't get some fresh air.
I don't have a garden.
Why don't you go for a walk with the dogs?
I don't know, because it's cold.
Yeah.
And
it's dark when you get home, probably.
Yes, it's dark. It's something about winter. Like, because in summer, I'll go and sit outside. You know, we've got a little outdoor area and I can sit outside and get fresh air, particularly on the weekends. When I get home from work, you know, have a little cheeky glass of wine or a cup of tea. But in winter, I don't. And so I'm just aware that I'm just not breathing any fresh air.
And why is it your worst? Do you feel bad? Like, as in, do you feel a bit bleh?
Do you need some vitamin D?
I feel like
She does
I
need
feel
vitamin
like,
D.
Yeah, I feel like I'm the air equivalent of scurvy. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's my worst. My best is on Saturday night, I went over to my eldest son's house.
That's where Jessie lives.
That's where Jessie lives.
I
Jessie
was thankfully going out.
Going
I was
out.
like, bye, bitches, I'm out.
She went out. I went over there with my younger son, and I spent the night eating pizza and watching the Olympics with my two sons. And I'm about to cry. I had such a lovely time.
You forgot to mention the part where you also came over on Friday night and watched the Olympics.
Oh, yeah. I forgot
You
about
were over both nights. We had a glass of wine.
I did.
You brought
did.
us dinner.
It's just Holly's worst nightmare. She's going to have a seizure. It's very upsetting for Holly because it's too much together. But I did. And you know what? The Olympics is bringing families together. What I've really missed is the monoculture because, like, if you just look at the, you've said you're watching a show with Luca, but I can't come and watch that with you. You're watching a show with Brent. My kids are watching something on YouTube. Yeah, I do try. I'm like, hi, what are we watching?
Oh, too gruesome.
Yeah. And so, my kids are watching something and everyone's watching on their laptops. I mean, no one sits around the TV anymore. But even last night, I was out having dinner with a girlfriend, and in the family group chat, Jace was like, everyone come downstairs and let's watch the Olympics. And, we're at a stage where we've got people in really different life stages, in and out of the house, social lives, whatever. And it's just a lovely thing that there's no plot, really. You just all sit there and you watch whatever. And the other thing that was just beautiful is that both of my sons fell asleep at, I think it was 8:30 on the couch, and so did the dog. So I was sitting on the couch in Jessie's house watching the Olympics by myself, and suddenly it just goes quiet. And I was just chatting away. And then I realised, everyone's asleep.
You know what's great about the Olympics too is that the commentary is good, but not
You
necessary.
don't have to listen, no.
So you can chat the whole time while you watch it. It's quite a social activity.
Suits me.
Yeah.
I'm asking questions. I'm like, what's that person? Oh, look, they've got good hair removal. How come no one's popping a flap? And then, it's just great.
I can't imagine why the boys fell asleep. Okay, my worst of the week. I asked for and received a special dispensation to talk about this today because I couldn't not. Generally, our rule on Fridays is no news cycle, best and worst included. But I have been very distressed this week at what's going on in Britain. There have been riots across the country, and I really wanted to talk about it because I think there's also just stuff to learn from this horror. And so I got a special permission to do this. So last Monday, a truly unthinkable crime, one that there's literally no words for, happened in a small town in England called Southport. It's in the northwest. It's about an hour from where I grew up in Manchester. A young man murdered 3 little girls and injured 8 other children and the adults who tried desperately to save them at a little kids' dance class on the first day of school holidays. I'm going to say those girls' names because I just think we've got to honour their lives. I know this is very heavy. BB King was 6, Elsie Dot Stancombe was 7, and Alice De Silva Aguiar was 9. It's the kind of horror that Sydney-siders are too familiar with after Westfield Bondi Junction attack in April this year. Completely out of the blue, completely unimaginable, the stuff of absolute nightmares, right? The young man arrested and charged with this crime, he was arrested and charged at the scene, very close to the scene, 17 years old. And in the chaotic hours after this attack, his name and identity were withheld from the public because he's a minor, right? And that's the law, in Britain at least. But what happened next is still roiling through Britain's towns and cities right now. Rumours immediately spread and were fuelled and fanned online that the attacker was a refugee who had arrived illegally on a boat. And that's a really hot button issue in Britain at the minute, as we're all familiar with here in Australia, particularly on the back of the recent elections there, where a party called UK Reform got 4 million votes, so did really well. And they're a right-wing party who push very hard on anti-immigration and anti-refugees. A crowd of people, fueled by these rumours, formed outside the local mosque at Southport and tried to break in. They attacked police. They caused damage and harm and injury. And since then, these so-called protests have spread all across England, particularly in the northwest, but not only, in other places too. Untempered by the truth of the matter, which actually got exposed this week when they lifted the restrictions on reporting because they wanted to end these rumours. And the fact that the young man, the alleged attacker obviously, was born in the UK. He was born in Wales and he lived just down the road from where this happened, and he's the child of Rwandan parents. His identity was revealed just before his 18th birthday by the judge, who was like, enough. The riots are ugly and they're violent. They've been softly encouraged by right-wing commentators and online conspiracists and lots of the familiar names like Andrew Tate, who are insisting that this is terrorism and that the police are hiding something. And there's something so devastating.
There's no evidence for that, is there?
There's no evidence for that.
So just to ask about what you just explained. So the alleged attacker was not, in fact, a refugee who arrived on a boat.
No.
And it was just similar to the Westfield Bondi Junction. It was just
we don't know.
We don't know,
right?
Okay.
So we don't know. He's appeared in court, and there are discussions about his mental state, of course, and all those things. But we don't know. But there is no evidence at all
that there was ideology
terrorism
or terrorism,
or that religion played any part of this. That's all entirely unknown. And the thing is that so distressing. I mean, it's distressing on so many levels, but the trauma of this entire community, devastated by the loss of these little innocent girls, has been co-opted by fake news, by rage bait, by all this hatred. And these gangs of mostly masked, which we talked about recently on the show too, of mostly masked racist thugs who are openly throwing Nazi salutes, wearing swastikas, attacking mosques, attacking hotels that house asylum seekers. They're fighting with police. They're attacking police dogs. It's horrifying. And one of the things I keep thinking about when I was watching this footage and why I wanted to talk about it is something that some commentators, including our own Emily Vernham, said after that terrible day at Bondi Junction. She was on the show and she said this, and I know she wasn't alone, and she said that a lot of black and brown Australians held their breath when that attack happened until they heard the news that the attacker was not black or brown themselves. And a lot of people were like, where's the relevance? Yeah. What does it matter? If that had been the case, the tone of the response would have been completely different. This is not to say in any way, like, of course, that the incidents there or here, they don't change the severity of that and the horror. What we're seeing playing out there, fueled by this populist right, it's not unthinkable that's what would have happened in Australia. I know we're in a different country. And it's just devastating to me that we're here in 2024. When I was a kid in the 80s in Britain, there was the National Front, who were like a sort of racist swastika-wearing skinhead. And like, you think it's from the past, you know, which I guess is one of the lessons. Anyway, that's my worst of the week. I just find it so distressing. If there is a silver lining, it's that there are people, ordinary people, like the woman Pat from Liverpool who's got her Nans Against Nazis sign, who are gathering outside these mosques and outside these hotels and trying to sort of tell these assholes to go away. That's my worst of the week. My best of the week involves my friend Mia, right? On our subscriber episode this week on Tuesday, Mia will be uncomfortable about this because she doesn't like holding herself up as a poster person for this or whatever, which I totally understand. But we talked about Mia's food fixations in relation to her ADHD. And I realised that very often when I'm talking to Mia and other friends of mine who are neurodivergent and my son who is neurodivergent, obviously I don't want to be specific about protect Billy's privacy as much as possible, but there's a little overlap between Mia and Billy.
I understand Billy so well in my soul.
I often ask questions like that I'm kind of looking to solve things, like fix things somehow. And I was saying to Mia was telling us all about how she eats the same food, like it makes her feel safe. She eats the same food. And I was like, but how can you change that? I was like, and how can I change? Because my son is very similar in that he has a very limited palate and very limited diet. And one of the things about parenting, particularly in this day and age, it seems is like there's an obsession with healthy food and varied food and food. And I'm like quizzing Mia because I'm hoping there's going to be some insight into how I can make Billy eat all these things he doesn't eat. And Mia just said to me at one point, because I said, well, there's this one thing that Billy will eat. And she's like, well, why don't you just let him eat that every day? And I was like, oh.
I thought I would just get up and fight a battle every
I thought
single
that
day.
every single day I would rail against my son. And I went home on Monday night after we'd recorded that show and I told Brent about it. And I was like, every day, and there'll be lots of families around the country who every day we have a discussion, a fight, an argument, a drama about food in our house that maybe we just don't need to have. And look, my best of the week is just that I learn a lot from you, Mia, and you're very generous sharing. You've made me look at something in a different way, and thank you.
My worst of the week is also quite heavy. Our family have had a really rough few weeks, and this kind of fits into the theme of today's show about caring. But my cousin Simon, who I've talked about a lot on this podcast, is in disability accommodation because he has an intellectual disability which impacts speech and motor skills and a number of other things. And so he is given like a grant by the NDIS who fund his like housing and all those sorts of things.
So he can live semi-independently.
Yes, exactly right. And in the last 6 months, some really serious allegations have been made about the accommodation that he was in. There were some allegations made that were really distressing to the family. We took him out immediately. It was very difficult to find other accommodation. We found the NDIS really difficult to get on the phone to and to report and get action, all of that. That was really hard. And then we moved Simon. And then we discovered just in the last few weeks that there has been another allegation made that is really, really serious. And for Simon's privacy, I won't say what it is. But if the person who allegedly perpetrated it were found guilty, then he would be, convicted and go to prison. It's very serious. And so immediately we were like, we need to speak to the NDIS. We've got a coordinator who helps us navigate the NDIS because it's really hard.
And it's made sense of some of the behaviours in Simon that have been different since you moved him out of the home, because you moved him out of the home not because of what you thought had happened to him, but because of other things in the home.
Yes.
And some behaviours have been very challenging and distressing that you now understand better.
And different. And so we've had this coordinator who has been trying to get onto the NDIS, dozens and dozens of emails, and this is my auntie and my mum and me, and we're trying to get an answer, for example, to the question, did this support worker have any clearance to be working with someone like Simon? We can't get an answer to that. The provider has still been sort of on the NDIS website as a recommended provider.
Oh, still now?
And so
they're still operating.
Yeah, they're still operating. And we've got a whole family of teachers who know how education works, which is that when an allegation, a serious allegation is made, you stand someone down for a minute and you investigate it.
And the allegation was not made by Simon, it was made by someone
Yes, exactly.
else.
And then he was interviewed by detectives, and the detectives have basically said, if Simon can't attest to what happened, then we're stuck. We've got our hands tied. Simon is, for anyone who's not his family, very difficult to understand. It's not something he's able to articulate. we want to know about like psychological support. Where do we go forward without re-traumatizing him or asking questions that will be distressing?
And what justice is there for someone in that
because
situation?
if that provider is still operating and we know that there are people in there who are also non-verbal,
vulnerable.
They are the most vulnerable people in the world being cared for by people who have allegedly done really bad things. And I think that what's most disappointing is that we love the NDIS, massive supporters, incredible idea, like pioneering, really support it. But whether it's been a result of underfunding or not structured correctly, there's no system and they're inundated with complaints, and you've got Australia's most vulnerable people being let down, and it's just the most disillusioning experience. So that's been our worst of the week. My best, on a lighter note, was...
was it also me?
You were adjacent.
I'm trying to go for 2 for 2.
It's also to do with good old Simon, who had a brilliant Thursday night at Hamilton.
Yes,
we went to Hamilton. Simon was so excited, rubbing shoulders with other musical enthusiasts.
It's so good. I've missed it.
It's so good. I've been getting phone calls for 2 months from Simon about when Hamilton is, and like watching it on YouTube and listening to it.
It was sung at your wedding.
It was sung at my wedding. And you know when you've kind of not listened to something you love for a while, and then you're like, you get to rediscover it all over again.
Yeah.
The cast is brilliant. It's in Sydney at the moment.
Yeah.
Love
I took
Hamilton.
Matilda. She knows every word. Rivaling Simon for the sing-along.
We bumped into quite a few outlouders.
Yes.
Thank you, Outlouders, for being with us through our Friday show. God, there's a lot of light and shade in that.
Highs,
Holy
some lows.
shit.
We've gone deep. We've gone wide.
We hope you held on to with us. I don't know what to
I want to know.
I was going to say you had
actually.
enjoyed it, and then I was like, no, I don't think so.
Well, I think just on the caring thing, I would love Outlouders who are carers or have had that experience. I would just love to know how you feel about it, like the complexity of the feeling about it. And if you do feel like it's degraded or it's a privilege, or please jump into the Mamamia Outlouders Facebook group and chat to us. We love to engage.
That's all we've got time for. A very big thank you to all of you and to our amazing team who help us produce this show. The show is produced by Emeline Gazilas. There's been audio production from Leah Porges. We're going to see you back here on Monday. See you then.
Bye.
Bye.
Shout out to any Mamamia subscribers listening. If you love the show and want to support us as well, subscribing to Mamamia is the very best way to do so. There is a link in the episode description.